Imagine a country at war, fighting for its very existence, led by a president whose legal term in office has just expired.
And yet, he remains in power.
Mm.
Not by force, but by law. It's a situation that has a lot of people asking some very hard questions.
Is this a democracy in crisis? Or is it a democracy doing what it must to survive?
Join hosts Alex and Aria in the Defense Report Room for sharp, no-nonsense breakdowns of the latest in global defense news, military technology, and strategic developments.
And today we're going to cover that exact paradox: Ukraine, President Zelenskyy, and the high-stakes constitutional challenge of wartime leadership.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're diving deep into a really complex issue here. President Zelensky's standard 5-year mandate officially ended back in May 2024.
It did, and yet he's still president. This isn't just, a simple delay. It's become a major point of political warfare. Exactly. It's what some analysts are calling a convergent threat. On one hand, you have Russia, which is systematically using this fact to hammer home the message that Zelenskyy is illegitimate.
A usurper, I think, is the term they love to use.
Right. And on the other hand, you have certain political voices in the West who are starting to express concern. They're asking if Ukraine is losing its democratic footing.
And those two lines of attack, even with very different motives, they end up creating the same pressure on Kyiv.
So for our deep dive today, what we really want to do is arm you, the listener, with the facts. We're going to dig into the polling data, the legal framework, and the raw logistics of the situation.
We need to cut through the noise.
Yeah.
What are the actual legal firewalls in place? Why is holding an election right now basically impossible? That's the mission.
Okay, let's get into it. And I think we have to start with public opinion, with the people. Because any leader's legitimacy, especially in wartime, it really rests on that.
And that's where the story is just...
Well, it's remarkable. If you think back to February 2022, right after the full-scale invasion, there was this massive rally around the flag effect.
Oh, absolutely.
Zelensky's approval rating just skyrocketed. I mean, it hit an astonishing 84%. And it stayed up there in the low 80s for all of 2023.
That kind of unity is almost unheard of. But, that emotional peak, that initial surge,
Yeah.
it couldn't last forever as the war dragged on.
It couldn't, and it didn't. By 2024, his approval did dip to around 60%. But here's the key data point for today for understanding the current situation. The latest 2025 polling shows it's stabilized.
Stabilized where?
At a very solid 67%. Now, you have to put that number in context. His predecessor, Petro Poroshenko, was often polling in the single digits. So 67%. That signifies really robust, entrenched wartime support.
So even with all the fatigue, the losses, the hard realities of a long war, he's still holding a level of support that most peacetime leaders would be envious of. Yes, but this is where it gets really nuanced. This is where you see the sophistication of the Ukrainian public's view. There's a huge gap, a 21-point gap, to be exact, between Zelensky's personal approval, that's 67%, and the approval for the national government as a whole.
Meaning the parliament, the cabinet of ministers?
Exactly. Their approval is way down at 46%.
What's fascinating here is it shows Ukrainians are making a distinction. They're not just giving blanket support. They're separating the leader from the institutions.
That is precisely it. They have high trust in the president as a commander-in-chief, the symbol of national defense, but that trust is insulated from their much, much lower trust in the day-to-day administrative and political bodies.
The ones they blame for things like corruption or slow policy.
Right. And this specialized trust is crucial. It allows the national defense effort to stay unified, while at the same time the pressure for accountability and criticism of the government continues, even without an election. It's a very clever way to manage legitimacy in a crisis.
That sophistication is so important. Okay, so let's connect that public support to the legal foundation. Because the public mood gives weight to the legal argument. This isn't just a political choice, it's a constitutional requirement.
And that is the absolute bedrock for Kyiv. Their ability to push back against all this pressure comes down to the constitutional firewall that's activated by martial law.
Explain that.
The Ukrainian constitution and the specific law on the legal regime of martial law are explicit. They flat out prohibit holding any national elections, presidential, parliamentary, local, you name it, while martial law is in effect. It's a full stop.
And what happens when the term technically runs out? Is there a vacuum of power?
No, and that's the other key provision. Article 103 of the Constitution automatically extends the president's authority until a newly elected president can be sworn in after martial law is lifted. So the seat is never legally vacant.
So it's a seamless legal transition of authority just for the same person.
It is. And what's more, That firewall is itself protected. Article 157 says you cannot make any amendments to the Constitution while under martial law.
So you can't, for example, just change the rule to allow an election.
You can't. The whole legal structure is designed to be immovable during a major conflict. It's a safeguard against political destabilization when you can least afford it.
Of course, you still need the political buy-in. I'm thinking of that resolution in the Verkhovna Rada, the parliament, back in February 2025.
Ah, yes, the unanimous vote, 268-0. They passed a resolution affirming the constitutional legitimacy of deferring the election.
Now, a unanimous vote can look a bit suspicious in a democracy. Critics would say it shows opposition is being stifled.
And that's a fair point to raise. So how does Kyiv answer that? They point back to the people.
To the popular mandate against holding elections right now?
Exactly. The polling on this is incredibly consistent. A huge majority, around 63% of Ukrainians, believe elections should be postponed until after a final peace agreement is signed.
So not just until martial law ends, but until the war is truly over.
Precisely. And only a tiny fraction, somewhere between 9 and 12%, want elections immediately. So that 63% consensus, that's the democratic answer to the unanimous parliament. The people themselves are making a strategic choice here.
They're saying, we will not risk national unity for a procedural vote right now.
It's survival over procedure. The analysis shows a direct link. The more someone trusts Zelenskyy, the more they believe in pushing for total military victory and delaying the vote.
So let's pivot. We've covered the law, we've covered the public mood, but here's where it gets really interesting. Let's talk about the grim reality on the ground.
The logistics.
The logistics. Even if you could legally hold a vote, why is it practically, operationally impossible?
Well, there are at least 5 massive, insurmountable barriers.
Yeah.
And they're the reason the constitutional ban exists in the first place. It reflects reality.
Okay, number 1.
Security. It's the most obvious one. Ukrainian officials are clear. You can't have a fair election without total air defense coverage or a ceasefire. How can you ask people to go to polling stations when the entire country is a potential target for Russian missiles?
You can't guarantee the safety of voters or the ballots themselves.
Not at all. Then, number 2, the sheer number of people who can't vote. The displaced population.
This is a huge one.
Staggering. You have millions displaced internally. You have over 4.3 million registered as refugees across Europe. How do you possibly organize a legitimate vote for a population that's so scattered? It would be a logistical nightmare.
Any election held without them would be immediately challenged as illegitimate.
Which brings us to number 3, territorial integrity. Roughly 10 to 13% of the Ukrainian population lives in Russian-occupied territory. Holding a national election while they can't vote is, well, it's essentially conceding those territories politically.
You'd be drawing a political map that excludes them.
Terrible precedent. Then, barrier number 4, the frontline soldiers. You've got at least 800,000 people in uniform. Because of the manpower crisis, there's no way to rotate them off the front lines to vote.
So the very people fighting the war would be disenfranchised.
Can you imagine an election where the army can't vote? It's morally and politically untenable. It would destroy credibility.
And finally, there's the money.
The financial constraint. Elections cost a fortune. The estimate is around $200 million.
$200 million?
That's money that needs to go to ammunition, to air defense, to salaries. Much of it is Western aid intended for defense. Diverting it to an election that is unsafe and incomplete, it's just not a viable choice.
And this all leads to Zelenskyy's really, really clever response to the Western pressure.
Ah, yes, the diplomatic judo move.
Exactly. He basically said, okay, you want an election, I'm ready, but...
You have to pay for it, and you have to guarantee the security. He told allies, if you provide the funding and the comprehensive air defense systems to make voting safe everywhere, we can talk.
It completely flips the script. It takes a political demand and turns it into a set of operational requirements that NATO would have to fulfill.
It forces them to confront the reality on the ground. It's a very effective way of saying, if you want this, you need to understand what it would actually take.
So let's circle back to those geopolitical pressures we mentioned at the start, because that move was a direct response to them.
Right. Vector 1 is the Russian campaign. It's constant, it's systematic. State media like TASS and RT are just relentlessly pushing the narrative that Zelenskyy is a usurper because his term expired.
And this isn't a new tactic for them, is it?
Not at all. It's a recycled playbook. They tried the exact same thing with Poroshenko back in 2014.
Yeah.
The goal is always to undermine stability inside Ukraine and to make Western partners doubt who they're dealing with.
Then you have Vector 2, the political pressure from the U.S. and parts of the West. When you hear prominent figures like Donald Trump saying things like, it's time for an election.
Or suggesting the war is just an excuse to hold on to power.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the real danger is when those two vectors converge. Russia takes those Western comments, which might be genuine democratic concerns,
And weaponizes them. They hold them up as proof that their own propaganda is true. It forces Kyiv to spend precious diplomatic energy just defending its own constitutional order instead of focusing on the war.
That's why the unified messaging from other allies is so important. Like when the European Commission came out and said very clearly that elections should only happen when conditions allow.
That statement was vital. It closed the seam that Russian hybrid warfare was trying to exploit. It affirmed that, under their own laws, Zelenskyy remains the democratically legitimate leader.
Okay, but even with all that external pressure managed, there's still a massive internal challenge, and that's corruption. If you suspend elections, the ultimate tool of accountability, how do you deal with the fact that 85% of Ukrainians still believe corruption is widespread?
That 85% number is key. It shows that the demand for good governance hasn't gone away just because there's a war on. So accountability has to find other channels.
And in Ukraine, the primary channel seems to be a very strong civil society.
Absolutely. The civil society organizations, the CSOs, are acting as the non-state opposition. They are the ones keeping the executive power in check. Trust in these groups is remarkably high.
And they get results.
They do. They monitor aid spending, they call out corrupt officials, they maintain that democratic culture of scrutiny, even under martial law.
And we're also seeing a really interesting use of digital tools to fill that accountability gap.
Ukraine is a pioneer here. They use online petitions in a really effective way. If a petition gets 25,000 votes, the government has to respond. Over 1,000 petitions hit that mark in 2023 alone.
And the Dia app.
The DIE app, exactly. They use it for surveys to gauge public opinion on policy. In fact, it was a huge digital mobilization that forced the government to bring back public asset declarations for officials, a key anti-corruption tool that had been suspended.
So the democratic muscle is still being flexed, just in different ways.
It is. But you can't ignore the long-term risks of all this centralized power under martial law. The U.S. State Department has raised concerns about things like the United TV Marathon.
Where all the channels broadcast one government-approved newsfeed.
Right, limiting opposition voices. And there have been reports of harassment against journalists who are too critical. That's the trade-off. It's a democratic security trade-off. You centralize for efficiency and survival, but you risk democratic backsliding if it goes on for too long.
So what does this all mean? What's the bottom line for you, our listeners?
I think the main takeaway is that Ukraine's political resilience right now is built on two things. First, a really clear and rigid constitutional framework that prevents a power vacuum. And second, a very strong public consensus, that 63% number, that prioritizes national survival over procedure.
That public mandate is their democratic shield against all this criticism.
It is, but that stability now just sets the stage for what comes next. And that is where the real test lies.
The first post-war election.
It's going to be ferociously competitive. The entire political landscape has been changed by the war. You're going to see new figures emerge, major political realignments.
The challenge won't just be counting the votes. It will be managing the political explosion that comes after 2, 3, maybe more years of pent-up political competition being released all at once.
Exactly. And you'll likely have high-profile military leaders, maybe someone like General Zelenskyy, entering the political ring. That's a whole new dynamic. So the real test of Ukraine's democracy isn't surviving the lack of an election now. It's surviving the rush to hold one later. That, I think, will be the moment of maximum political danger.
You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex and Aria, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry.
Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. We'll catch you next time.